Hey, well, I'm going to talk about the threat landscape today because we were born in the cloud. We do endpoint security, we do cloud security. There were some terms that were thrown out like ASPM and DSPM, and that's very much the core of some of our abilities here at CrowdStrike for protecting our customers across a variety of different footprints. So not only your endpoint, but your workloads. We see all of your assets as a pivot point for an adversary to gain access to. And we've built an amazing capability of technologies that ultimately protect those assets. And we do that by analyzing a lot of data. So as we walk through the different types of cloud attacks that we've observed over the past year alone, a lot of it is focused on initially gaining access via identities, right? We're not going to overthink the attack landscape, but we are seeing adversaries leveraging identities in a way that basically gives them access in a very similar scenario that you saw with Caleb's presentation. Once they gain access to those cloud services, they kind of rule that world, and they're very familiar with the control planes, and we'll talk a little bit about that here in a few. They're getting past MFA, so again, not to repeat what Caleb covered, but they understand how to take advantage of misconfigurations within these different services. And of course, their actual objectives include extortion. We've seen double and triple extortion campaigns coming out recently from these attacks, and we'll talk about a group here in a few minutes called Scattered Spider. Anyone here of Scattered Spider? I'm sure you've heard it dozens of times. One of the e-crime groups that we've been tracking that's been very prolific, to say the least. We have groups that are looking for resources, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So these adversaries, they're monetizing their access any way possible, right? They want to get in, extort you. They're trying to make a dollar, trying to make a buck. Don't feel sorry for them though, right? That's not the objective of this. They've basically learned to understand, hey, if I get into this environment, I can leverage these resources for something like crypto hijacking. What is Bitcoin trading at today? Anyone know? What is it, 50 still? I don't know. I've gotten out of it for some time. If anyone, hit me up later. I'm very curious about that. But we've been doing a lot of efforts on understanding what that evolving tradecraft looks like in the cloud. And so today, I wanted to walk through a couple of scenarios with you on what these adversaries are doing and kind of their migration into changing their tradecraft based upon our own observations. First, the majority, and I'm sorry that these slides got a little misconfigured on the send earlier, but the things that we've learned from include our responses or our involvement in some major incident response in the cloud. Has anyone done incident response in the cloud? No? A couple of hands out there? So if you think your cloud security approach today is a disaster, just wait till you have to do IR in the cloud. I'm not sure if Sun Tzu actually wrote that, but don't hold me to that. That may be the art of war 2.0. There's basically two types of actors when it comes to these cloud attacks. There's the more agnostic actor that we've observed, where the actor is basically gaining access to a system. That workload is irrelevant to them, right? It's very opportunistic. Once they get access to that environment, their objectives are playbook driven, right? Launch the ransomware, steal the data, go on to the next victim. The cloud or the control plane is irrelevant, right? And then there's the cloud conscious actor, where these groups ultimately, they have their head in the clouds, right? They understand exactly what that control plane is. They understand the different CSPs and the configurations that are required to take advantage of their victims. And they ultimately abuse those services tremendously in order to not only further the attack, but also to stay very sticky in those environments. There's also a lot of talk about exploits being used within these cloud services. Patching was an earlier example in Caleb's presentation. We're seeing adversaries that are using server-side request forgery or forgery requests, right, on the cloud side to gain access into EC2 instances. I'm not going to dissect this specific attack in its entirety, but this is essentially what it would look like in the hands of someone like Scattered Spider, right, where you can take advantage of, I'll go back real quickly, you can take advantage of things like IMDS services, which is basically an identity management service tied to AWS. And using these exploits, these groups understand that, hey, if I can find, for example, a vulnerable Apache server within any of these cloud services, this ultimately will get me access into a wider range of resources. And this is something that Scattered Spider has been adopting in some of their techniques recently, in addition to some interesting techniques that are focused more on social engineering. And we'll talk about that if I have some time today, because apparently I'm already down to 14 minutes. This is basically what it would look like, the anatomy of an attack, right? Server-side forgery request, right? Apache server being exploited. Once that adversary, this specifically being Scattered Spider, once they've discovered Things like the S3 buckets or the misconfigurations or the access that they have within this control plane, they basically exfiltrated a tremendous amount of data, delivered a ransom note to their target to say, listen, victim, Mr. or Mrs. Victim, we have your information, please pay us or it's going to end up on a DLS, right, a data loss site or data leak site. And it ultimately ended up on a data loss site within 90 days, right, after the victim refused to pay. So that's kind of one example of how these adversaries, again, are opportunistic. They're going to find that data, they'll exfiltrate it, they'll get it out as quickly as possible. But let's actually talk a little bit about a more sophisticated approach to Scattered Spider's tradecraft. This is an instance where they actually got access to a cloud instance via smishing. I actually hate saying the word smishing. I don't know why, but it's a little uncomfortable, but smishing, it is what it is, SMS attack. And once they successfully gained access to that environment, they logged into an Azure instance using the MyApps login for this specific user that was compromised. And so once they got access to these applications, they added MFA to that compromised account so that they could blend in with legitimate traffic. So can you imagine that? The actual adversaries are turning on MFA as a best practice, right? So now they have access to that environment. And then here's what really happens, right? It's interesting. They find a SharePoint server within this cloud infrastructure, or these cloud services, and they find this VPN documentation. And that VPN documentation helps them to establish a VPN connection back to this victim's on-premise virtual infrastructure. So now think about the cloud as a pivot point for on-premise access, right? And once that on-premise access was established, they did something very interesting. They logged back into that MyApps environment with a second account. So think about the concept of being a little more persistent and saying, you know what, I'm going to jump back onto this environment with a second ID, and I'm going to basically pivot my way into an AWS environment that was connected to that local service or to that AWS service. And then here, once they moved laterally onto that AWS instance, they added this backdoor using this access key exchange. They created a new set of accounts. They created a new EC2 instance, escalated their privileges, basically locked this victim out of their account, and they disabled all security tools for the cloud. So think about this, right? Adversary knows that environment better than the actual victim, right? This customer, or this victim, unfortunately, didn't necessarily have certain capabilities turned on. They had a lot of misconfigurations. And this group, once they logged in, they just really knew how to gain access to that. And that was an interesting take or an approach, because it also sets the stage for, if your teams aren't aware of all of the little bells and whistles and misconfigurations within these cloud services, these adversaries are going to, they know it. They're learning it. They're actually very efficient and very effective at how rapid they move through these environments and how they understand how to get back into your environment, especially if you've published your VPN login instructions on a server that was probably not protected. So we've been seeing a significant amount of increase in these cloud-conscious adversaries. About 110% of cases that we studied included adversaries migrating into these cloud environments with very efficient knowledge of how to navigate these systems, how to manipulate these configurations or take advantage of them, right? 84% of these adversaries were tied to e-crime, right? Which means that there was another small percentage that were tied to foreign intelligence or nation-state activity that we'll talk about here in a few minutes. Okay, so how does AI fit into this conversation? Because we are at a conference that's themed on AI, so I would be doing this conference a disservice if I didn't say AI a few times. Well, let's talk about the pain, right? This is how it fits in. From an adversary perspective, there are the easy things, right? I'll talk about the easy one first. Effective phishing attacks. I think gone are the days where you're getting that email from the Nigerian prince saying, click here, or send me your credit card data, or I need to transfer $10 million. By the way, just a side note, right? As a country, we could have addressed the Nigerian scam thing like decades ago. If we just had like a president get on to like the State of the Union and say, hey, Nigeria is not a monarchy. They have a presidential. Don't click on that email. There's no prince. I digress. So there are basically a tremendous amount of language barrier gaps that are being bridged now with AI, right? So we talked about large language models, simplifying the way that these phishing attacks can be built so that the accuracy and the believability, is that a word today? It is now, all right? That it's higher. So the likelihood of me clicking on that email or passing on my credentials or going to a Western Union to send $10,000 to that prince, right? Those are basically now, a lot more efficient. They're a lot more effective because they're crafted by large language models that eliminate that language barrier gap. The other side is deepfakes, right? Adam Myers, who's the head of our Counter Adversary Operations team, made a deepfake of me recently using my voice on the Adversary Universe podcast, and he said something that this may divide the room, but he posted something internally at CrowdStrike that said, basically using this deepfake, that I love pineapple on my pizza, and I actually don't like pineapple on my pizza, and I'm not very offended by that. But still, nonetheless, it sounded very much like, man, I let my son hear it, and my son said, hey, Dad, it sounds like you're on auto-tune, which to him was a cool thing because he likes rap. To me, again, a bit of a wave before my deepfakes hit the news. The third one is very important. I do want to spend a couple minutes talking about this. There was a research paper published in April. It's very important, by the way, and this goes back to my server-side forgery request exploit that I mentioned earlier. There's a group that published a report, a white paper, and it basically goes over GPT-4. They basically fed GPT-4, it was roughly a dozen or maybe 15 CVEs, one-day CVEs, right? So one-day vulnerabilities with a very detailed description. And basically GPT-4, in contrast to GPT-3 or other large language models out there, GPT-4 exploited 84% of those CVEs that were provided. So it basically built code to exploit the vulnerabilities that were described day one, right? GPT-3 did 0%, Llama did 0%. I mean, there's a whole list of it. It's a really amazing research paper, and in the interest of time, I would grab the names of the guys who wrote this. But it's fascinating to know that if they took the description of the CVE out, then it was a 3% success rate. But they put the descriptions back in, an 84% success rate across the 15 or 16 or so vulnerabilities, which is mind-blowing, right? So think about that attack that I described earlier, where this attacker or this adversary goes in and finds this Apache exploit or this vulnerability and exploits it successfully, right? Think about the effort it took for them to build that or scan and figure out ways to ultimately go through that process and enumerate their victims accordingly. You guys know the entire attack cycle. But if I have AI doing it for me, and if I can just basically point AI to a series of targets and say, go ahead and figure it out, right? That's game-changing. So in our world, what we're seeing is AI is changing the velocity at which adversaries are operating, right? Think about even the concept of an adversary getting access to source code, dumping it into a large language model and saying, hey, figure out something I can exploit, right? That's game-changing. That is velocity, right? And that is going to be something we're paying a lot of attention to because it also lends itself to this concept of recursive attack cycle enforcement, meaning like now can I use this AI with integrating itself into a plethora of offensive tools that are out there, like SED or Beef or you name it. Can I have this AI model? Can I just tell it my target, give it a list of companies, give it a breakdown or profile of the type of software that this company uses, and then have AI kind of build the best attack plan for this target, and then recycle through it against a different victim if it doesn't work, right? That's essentially what it's going to do. It's going to really change the game at which these adversaries are operating. So in our world, again, we're a big technology company. We're big on data. And AI, obviously, needs to be also in the hands of the defenders. So what does an AI augmented SOC look like? Well, here at CrowdStrike, we're big about investigative assistance. This is not about just saying that an AI, a large language model, is going to handle all the threats automatically. We are very big about ensuring that there's people that can leverage and use the tools that we create to empower them and get to the bottom of an answer or do root cause analysis a lot faster. So intelligent summarization. Show me adversaries targeting my industry and my company, given a series of attacks and tradecraft that we've been monitoring. Show me CVEs in my environment that may be actively exploited in a campaign that we're tracking or that's out there. Training and onboarding. How do I ensure that, we're talking about resources. Caleb mentioned in his presentation that resources are one of the #1 issues that CISOs are facing today. Well, why not have, an AI model help get them on board, asking the right questions? What are my top threats in my environment? Show me systems that are the chattiest. Show me users that are impacting my environment the most because someone is always clicking on the wrong thing or they're always resetting their password because of some issue, right? Those are trends or those are behaviors that could be indicative of a longer problem, right? That person that keeps forgetting their password probably wrote it on a sticky note somewhere and it's stuck at the bottom of their shoe as they left, walked into the parking lot. So think about that, right? And then query translation. We're talking about, putting data together into a platform that ultimately gives you access into some consistency. That's essentially what AI fits into, or how it fits into on the defender side. So again, show me my vulnerabilities. Think about this, right? We walked through this scenario of using Charlotte, which is one of our AI models, to say, hey, how would I get an idea of the exposure of a specific type of vulnerability based upon a threat actor that's targeting my industry, right? And having an AI model walk through that and give you that output versus having to do that manually, which could basically take a little over 30 minutes, depending on how efficient the analyst is, right? Versus 19 seconds, right? I mean, that's pretty tremendous. In our world also, what we're doing is we're converting natural language into an API call in the back end. And so in lieu of just saying, hey, we have all of this very, very rich telemetry that we can just dump into a large language model, which basically can be susceptible to hallucinations. In contrast, let's just take natural language and translate that into a query that's available against the dozens and dozens of APIs that we've published for our customers, right? That really limits the type of manipulation or type of poisoning that you would have access to for AI. So what do we do here at CrowdStrike? Again, we're very big on data. I'll leave you with these last two slides, basically including all of the data from our endpoint technology, our cloud services, our ASPM, you name it, right? There's a massive amount of capabilities that we have here at the company. We basically opened up the kimono, if you will, when it comes to not only seeing what we do natively in our first-party capabilities, but we also have an amazing ecosystem of integrations into, quite frankly, hundreds of different vendors that could send their data into our platform, where we can apply AI, we can apply threat hunting, we can apply a lot of the analytics that we've built over the past 12 years or so, and then we basically put humans into the center of that to ensure that our customers have access to accuracy and have access to efficacy. So if you have any questions, my name is Christian Rodriguez. It was really great to see everyone. Thank you so much for your time.